Could there be a place more violent and dangerous than a war zone? You would think not, but unfortunately, yes. El Salvador, the Central American nation, was once known as a global hotspot for gang violence. In 2015, the country captured international attention for its staggering crime statistics, with gang warfare entrenched as a grim reality of daily life. Dubbed the murder capital of the world, the country had an abysmal homicide rate of 103 per 100,000 inhabitants, the highest in the world at the time. August of that year recorded the highest fatalities since the end of the El Salvadorian Civil War in 1992. Add to that an overall unstable economy and political climate, El Salvador was definitely not a good place to be. Fast forward to today, and El Salvador is one of the safest countries in the world. The criminal gangs have been largely neutered, with the average citizen able to live relatively normal lives. But it has come at the cost of civil liberties and democratic norms. So in this video, we'll explore how the country got to such a bad state in the first place, how did this dramatic change even happen, and is it worth the price that's being paid? Let's find out. So where did all this gang violence even come from? To understand the roots of El Salvadorian gang violence, we need to look back to the 1970s and 80s. During this time, El Salvador was torn apart by a long and brutal civil war that lasted for 12 years and resulted in the deaths of over 75,000 people. Many Salvadorans fled to Los Angeles during this period to escape the violence, where Mexicans and Salvadorans were the main Latino groups. Life in Los Angeles for these newcomers was tough. They faced discrimination and struggled to make a living and became prey to the emerging gang culture in LA. By the 1990s, gang violence was a major problem in Los Angeles. To deal with the issue, the US government started deporting gang members back to El Salvador. But this led to a new problem. These deported gang members took their gang culture back with them. Soon, gangs became a part of life in El Salvador. By the early 2000s, El Salvador was overrun by gangs. It's estimated that about 118,000 members of the population were involved in gangs. Considering El Salvador only has a population of 6 million, this is quite a lot. Gangs such as MS-13 and Barrio 18 were terrorizing the population. Gang members would extort local businesses, shootings were regular, and violent crimes such as murder and rape were commonplace, with the biggest victims being the common El Salvadoran people. The situation only deteriorated from there, leading to the statistics from 2015 and what seemed like a hopeless situation for the country. Then, in 2019, what could only be described as a miracle happened for the people of El Salvador, when Nayib Bukele emerged as a pivotal figure in the political landscape of El Salvador, elected to the presidency and starting a fresh chapter in the nation's history. At the youthful age of 37, he became the youngest head of state in Latin America. Against the backdrop of chronic poverty, rampant violence, and widespread emigration that plagued the populace for decades, Bukele's inauguration marked a turning point for the ailing nation, and a departure from the traditional political establishment characterized by the dominance of El Salvador's two major political parties and attempted peace negotiations with the gangs. Bukele positioned himself as an anti-corruption crusader, advocating for sweeping reforms to combat systemic graft. His rallying cry was, "There's enough money to go around so long as no one steals," which showed his commitment to ushering in a new era of transparency and accountability. Bukele's political ascent began at the age of 30 when he secured the mayoralty of Nueva Cuscatlan, a small town comprising of fewer than 10,000 residents, where he excelled. Building on this early success, he later won the mayoralty of San Salvador, the capital city, before ultimately ascending to the presidency, marking a meteoric rise fueled by a promise of change and renewal. Breaking from the past, Bukele took a bold approach to gang violence, choosing confrontation over negotiation. He promised to eliminate gangs from the country within 4 years and wasted no time in implementing tough measures when he became president. His efforts paid off quickly, with a significant drop in murders in the first 150 days of his presidency. In fact, violence reached its lowest point in 15 years during the first 7 months of 2019. A historic moment came on July 31st when no killings were reported, something unheard of in the past 19 years. Bukele's firm policies and decisive actions were credited for these positive changes in the fight against gang crime. So, how did he do all this? Bukele's uncompromising stance on crime unfolded through his hallmark security strategy, famously known as the Territorial Control Plan.
Cuando iniciamos el gobierno nos sentamos con el gabinete de seguridad y dijimos, vamos a lanzar el plan control territorial.
Comprising of 7 strategic phases, the plan's sole objective centered on dismantling the grip of organized criminal elements across the nation. The first phase, aptly named Preparations, focused on preventing and suppressing crime by taking control of prisons and increasing police and armed force presence, with authorities ramping up police and military deployments in municipalities plagued by high gang activity. With prisons, before Bukele, gangs controlled the prisons and used them as headquarters, where high-ranking gang members lived in luxury, ordered homicides, and directed those gang members out of the territory. In order to disrupt gang operations, Bukele implemented extraordinary measures aimed at severing communication channels between incarcerated leaders and their cohorts outside prison walls. Under the umbrella of a state emergency, stringent restrictions were imposed on prisoners, including confinement to their cells, with no visitation privileges, barring access to recreational and medical facilities except under exceptional circumstances, mail correspondence, access to electronic devices such as radio and television, and engagement in work activities were also curtailed. These moves were seen as highly effective in crippling gang operations. On July 2, 2019, Bukele announced the beginning of Phase 2 of the Territorial Control Plan, known as Opportunity, which, parallel to the security measures, focuses on a multifaceted approach targeting social prevention of crime and the restoration of the nation's social fabric. Central to this initiative was the establishment of urban wellness opportunity centers, serving as community hubs to foster opportunities for youth and facilitate social integration. On 1st of August 2019, Bukele announced the beginning of Phase 3 of the Territorial Control Plan, known as Modernization, which focuses on the modernization of security forces, equipping them with state-of-the-art technology and weaponry. Plans for bolstering the national police force with drones, night vision gear, surveillance equipment, firearms, protective gear, and increased personnel deployment underscored a commitment to enhancing law enforcement capabilities. With the fourth phase, called Incursion, announced on the 19th of July 2021, concerted efforts were made to intensify police and military presence in areas plagued by criminal activity, with a strategic aim to double troop numbers and effectively combat entrenched gang operations. Next, Phase 5, Extraction, was perhaps the most controversial phase, as Bukele's campaign against criminal syndicates intensified and he declared a state of emergency, suspending civil liberties and amplifying his powers and authority to combat gangs. Announced in 2022, Phase 5 sought to surround large cities and extract the terrorists who are hiding within the communities without giving them the slightest possibility of escape. This decisive move facilitated the apprehension of a staggering 74,000 gang members over the course of 2022 and 2023. In tandem with these measures, the National Assembly sanctioned a state of exception, empowering authorities to detain individuals seen suspicious without recourse for legal defense. Furthermore, Bukele ordered the construction of the Terrorism Confinement Center. Completed in 2023, this new prison has the capacity for 40,000 inmates to hold individuals arrested during the gang crackdown and to relieve overcrowding in the country's other prisons. It's this crackdown that has led to criticisms from human rights organizations. With Phase 6, Integration, Bukele announced the formation of the National Department of Integration, which would focus on medium and long-term needs, such as employment focus, approving training programs, and generating programs to reduce poverty. Finally, and mysteriously, as of April 2024, Phase 7 has not been made public. Only President Bukele and some of his administration know what it is. Overall, the efficacy of the Territorial Control Plan is undeniable. The implementation of these measures has yielded remarkable results, with the homicide rate, which if you recall was previously over 100, is now standing at 2.4 per 100,000 inhabitants. This is more in line with highly developed countries such as Canada and USA, which have a murder rate of 2.3 and 6.4 respectively. It can't be denied that taking a murder rate from over 100 to 2.4 in less than a decade is an astonishing achievement, heralding in a new era of security and stability for El Salvador. And it's these small freedoms that mark a monumental shift for regular Salvadorans. They can now enjoy traversing San Salvador by night, order pizza from delivery services newly entering former gang territories, and open businesses without gangs extorting them for money. In the midst of all this, Bukele's policy is serving as a model for other Latin American nations also dealing with their own crime problems. Politicians across Latin America, in countries such as Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Honduras, Ecuador, and Peru, have implemented or have called for the implementation of security policies similar to those implemented by Bukele. The mayor of Lima, Peru, has even announced plans to dedicate a park in Bukele's honor, lauding his decisive actions in quelling crime. As Latin America is the region with the highest murder rate in the world, the Bukele effect has assumed prominence in the region, where governments grapple with entrenched issues of crime and insecurity. Now, while Bukele certainly deserves praise for being tough on crime, there are worries about his government's respect for democracy and human rights. Human rights groups around the world are speaking out, slamming the widespread abuses happening and pointing to cases of prisoner deaths and unfair legal procedures. The United States, now under President Biden, has also raised concerns about human rights, especially allegations of police and security forces carrying out killings and making people disappear without a fair trial. It has been reported that many innocents have been swept up in the gang crackdowns, mistaken for being in a gang simply because they have tattoos, and with no legal recourse once they are in prison. What's more troubling is hearing about kids as young as 12 being put in jail, showing a lack of respect for their rights and proper legal proceedings. And now El Salvador has the highest incarceration rate in the world at 1,086 people per 100,000, with an estimated 1.6% of the country's population said to be currently incarcerated. Critics argue that Bukele is concentrating too much power and taking anti-democratic actions, suggesting a move towards authoritarianism. This has sparked concerns about the weakening of democratic systems and values. The concern that sacrificing civil liberties now could lead to an authoritarian government in the future is a real one. Bukele has even been named the world's coolest dictator, which is both humorous and kind of concerning. However, despite the criticisms, amongst the people whose opinion matters the most, the El Salvadoran people, it's not even an issue. Bukele is one of the most popular presidents in El Salvador's history, as his approval ratings generally hover around the 90% mark. And in the recent 2024 El Salvador elections, Bukele stormed to re-election with an astounding 85% of the vote, the highest margin in worldwide democratic history. So the people have spoken, and they're all in on Bukele's plan for El Salvador. So in conclusion, the effectiveness of Bukele's policy can't be denied. While there definitely are some concerns about the long-term effects of the suspension of civil liberties and democratic norms, to take a country from being the murder capital of the world to one of the safest in the world is an astonishing achievement. In the end, we'll just have to wait and see how the long-term effects play out. There definitely needs to be checks and balances to prevent any authoritarian moves. The story definitely highlights the importance of strong, decisive leadership ready to make difficult decisions. For now, Bukele is taking his victory lap, enshrined in glory, with the overwhelming support of his people. And if the people themselves support this policy, then who are we outsiders to say anything to the contrary? But what do you think about the miracle carried out by Bukele? Do you think that the ends justify the means in this case? Let us know in the comments. We'd be glad to hear your views.